welcome back to my channel. This week is just packed with video. I mean, there's videos every day, so if you aren't subscribed, I just think you're making a poor decision. Obviously, we have a massive game tomorrow night between Hawthorn and Geelong, and then Saturday Arvo, Saturday Twilight, Saturday night, whatever you want to call it, we have a massive game between Collingwood and Brisbane. If you missed it, there are already two videos on my page, one all about Geelong, the other all about Hawthorn going into that Friday night blockbuster preliminary final at the MCG. Today we're going to be focusing on Collingwood versus Brisbane, and specifically we're going to be focusing on Collingwood. So if you're not subscribed, you should be, because we've got a Brisbane video coming out tomorrow. Then we have the review video of whoever wins and how they won between Geelong and Hawthorn on Saturday, and then Sunday the same thing for this game between Collingwood and Brisbane. So if you aren't subscribed, you're missing out. Huge week next week with the grand final prep as well. So enough of me babbling and trash talking. Let's just get straight into it. So we're going to focus firstly on the strengths of Collingwood. And the first strength, the most obvious strength, is that they are the best defence in the league. We have to focus on their defensive setup and their defensive intercept. So straight away in this first quarter, we're 15 minutes into this first quarter. And what we're looking at here is all about the defensive setup. So the first mark here from Pedlar has to break through this Collingwood press. And as soon as you realise that you think you've broken through the Collingwood press, you really haven't, because of their ability to set up 2, 3, 4 kicks behind the football. So as soon as Pedlar looks up, he thinks, this is the Collingwood +1 right now. We've broken through the spare. But Collingwood's ability to create a spare is what makes them so good. So even though Will Parker is the spare and Adelaide have technically broken through it, this is now the spare. So Mason Cox has realised that I need to create a +1 at this aerial contest. So he's leaving Riley O'Brien as his direct matchup. He's leaving him to go into the forward 50 by himself. And what that does is it creates an artificial spare. When I talk about artificial spare, I'm saying that there are an equal number of players in the vicinity, but an artificial spare is when that player in the vicinity leaves their direct opponent to create the illusion of a spare in a contest, in a marking contest, or a ground level contest. So Mason Cox here is creating an artificial spare at this aerial contest. And what that does is it forces Fogarty to come and play on Mason Cox, or Mason Cox to play on Fogarty. So now these two are together. It means Billy Frampton can sit out the back of this contest, and that means if the ball comes to the back, Billy Frampton's by himself standing ready to clean up the mess. But also, that allows him to be the body check for Tex Walker, which is what is so important and so valuable for a player like Darcy Moore. So Darcy Moore now has the knowledge, because Mason Cox is coming across, because Billy Frampton is still in this aerial contest, that gives Darcy Moore the confidence and the ability to fly at the football. And he can do that because he now understands we've got a match up here one-on-one, which means Fogarty's not going to get an easy uncontested mark. And we have a matchup at the back here, so if I misjudge the football, or if the football goes out the back, I'm not getting burnt on the back end by Tex Walker standing behind me. So I can be really aggressive, I can be really proactive. So that is Collingwood's structure and Collingwood's system about creating an artificial spare. A very similar thing is going to happen right here. So Darcy Cameron now is creating the artificial spare. It happens so often for Collingwood. It actually happens quite often where you will see the opposition to Collingwood get a really easy out the back sort of goal. And it's because of plays like this. So Darcy Cameron on Riley O'Brien again. So Riley O'Brien or the opposition ruckman in this situation is so vital for Collingwood to create this artificial spare. So as soon as this ball starts to come in, Darcy Cameron goes, we need to create a spare at this contest so one of us can mark the football. And all that does is it leaves a spare man out the back for the opposition team, but it creates a 2v1 in the aerial contest. And that allows Billy Frampton here to say, all I need to do in this situation is to just push Riley Thilthorpe under this contest. So I just need to body him under this contest because I know that we have a spare out the back. And as soon as you can do that, you get really easy turnovers, you get really easy intercept marks. But not every Collingwood spare is an artificial spare. A lot of the time it is just a genuine spare behind the football that they put there in free play. So look at the work of Darcy Cameron here. So Darcy Cameron is going to compete in this centre bound stoppage. And as soon as he does, you just watch him leak back to a kick behind this football. So there's a bit of general play, there's a bit of blah blah, a bit of contest, a bit of blah blah blah, whatever's happening at this contest. But in the background here, Darcy Cameron has moved from that centre stoppage to behind the football, one kick behind the football. So as soon as Laird kicks this, bang, we can create a spare with Will Parker. And then over the back, Darcy Cameron's standing by himself and Riley O'Brien is stuck in the mud at the moment. And what this does is, so if the opposition doesn't man up Darcy Cameron, he gets to stand behind the football and take intercept possessions or intercept marks like this. But the most important thing, and what Adelaide did, was they actually sent Riley Thilthorpe or Darcy Fogarty or Tex Walker up to man up Darcy Cameron. And what does that do? If the opposition is going to send up one of their forwards to man up on the spare behind the football in Darcy Cameron, all that does is it shifts the spare to the defender. And that's what Collingwood are able to manipulate so well. So because they had Mason Cox in the forward half of the ground, Darcy Cameron was able to float back a lot more often. And that forced Adelaide to man him up in general play, which allowed Darcy Moore to be spare behind the football by himself. So all that did was just shift the spare even further behind, which is why we saw Darcy Moore be able to take intercept mark after intercept mark after intercept mark. And it's because of the ability for Darcy Cameron and Collingwood to float back behind the football and create the spare, a genuine spare behind the football. So Collingwood's ability to create artificial spares and genuine spares is second to none. And it is probably the backbone of their defensive system. So their intercept game is second to none, but then their actual defensive structure and their defensive system is really, really impressive. So we're going to see it against Brisbane. And I think what is really important to realise is the fact that Adelaide play a very similar handball, uncontested mark game to Brisbane. So when we look at the way that Adelaide like to move the football, it's a lot of shifting the defence, it's a lot of uncontested possessions, and then when they find a hole, they run straight through the middle of that hole and just cut you up. And that's exactly what Brisbane like to do. It's a game plan built for the MCG. We heard Chris Fagan say it. I think it was in the off-season, Chris Fagan said that we built a game plan for the MCG, which is why their record at the Gabba isn't as strong as it used to be, because their game plan used to be built for the Gabba. They were unbeatable when you went up to Brisbane, but very beatable at the MCG. So they shifted their game plan. They shifted the way they play to be suited to the MCG. And it's this, kick, short chip, shift the defence. And as soon as you find one lazy midfielder, one lazy forward who is out of assignment, out of position, you just run straight through the hole that's created, through your uncontested mark game, through the overlap handball game. So look at Berry right now in this situation. He's trying to find a place through the middle of the ground to take that uncontested mark, to take that short 45 kick. But look at the defensive setup here from Collingwood. So this is what makes Collingwood so good. And this is what Geelong did in the qualifying final against Brisbane. As soon as you can cut off these options here, as soon as you can cut off all of this dead space, all of this really, really important space, if you can make this space a dead space and a space that's not usable for Brisbane, and you force them up the line to one-on-one contests, they don't necessarily have the aerial marking contest players that they need to be able to play this sort of game style, which is why you can get really easy, really good one-on-one intercept marks. There's two really good strengths to the way that Collingwood set up defensively against Brisbane, but this is the way that Geelong set up defensively against Brisbane. So Levi Ashcroft is going to get this football and his eyes are straight away going into the middle of the ground. So this is the kick that they want to get. They want to get it here so they can either go straight towards goal through an overlap handball, or they can switch it to the other side, but switch it through the middle of the ground. But Collingwood overcommitted numbers and forced them to have to kick up the line. So Collingwood are actually happy to genuinely play one-on-ones everywhere up the line on the boundary side of the contest and actually overcommit and extra numbers through the middle of the ground so that Brisbane couldn't go through that. So the first positive, the first benefit of playing or overcommitting through the middle of the ground is that Brisbane couldn't move the ball through the middle of the ground. But the second biggest component is that when Brisbane did try and switch the football, because Collingwood had extra numbers in the middle of the ground, it meant that their numbers could switch to the other side. So as soon as Zorko got the ball on the outside, he looks up and all of the Collingwood players who were clogging up the middle of the ground are actually the first ones able to get to the fat side of the contest, to the fat side of the ground. So Zorko's looking up going, I don't have a place to be, so I've got to get on my bike. All of the Collingwood players have shifted really, really quickly because they were already set up in the middle of the ground. And as soon as you can do that, that's when you bring your ground level pressure players in like Bobby Hill, like Bo McCreary, all of these players at ground level, Lockie Schultz. That is the benefit of stacking the midfield and and congesting the midfield. As soon as you can do that, you create the turnover game, you create the pressure game, and then Collingwood are able to score pretty much effortlessly in this round 6 matchup. We're going to see a very similar thing right now. So Brisbane wanting to go through the middle of the ground, they're wanting to switch the football. But as soon as Tunstall gets this football and wheels out to the boundary side, look at this. So we're going to pause it essentially right now. Look at the overcommitment of numbers in the middle of the ground for Collingwood. Overcommitting numbers so that Brisbane couldn't take a kick to the point of the square, which they usually love to do. And as soon as they do that, Collingwood are happy to back in their defenders one-on-one up the boundary side. So we get to this contest and we have a genuine 2v2 contest here. And Collingwood was saying, we aren't going to let you go through the middle of the ground. If you want to go up the boundary side and back in your forwards or your midfielders in one-on-one contest, we're going to do the exact same thing. And as soon as they were able to do that, Collingwood just won these one-on-one matchups, or at the very least halved them. And then off the turnover, they were just way too strong, way too powerful. Now, the next strength that I want to speak about is probably one of the most underrated parts of Collingwood's game. We often speak about their forward pressure, and we often speak about their ability to intercept the football. And what I want to speak about is their scoring from stoppage, their scoring from clearance. So they're not necessarily a good clearance team. They're actually one of the poorer teams in the league at just the overall number of clearances, the number of stoppages they win. When they win stoppage and when they win clearance, it is so well designed, it is so well thought out that every time they do win a clearance, they are running into open space consistently. So set up here between Dacos and Marcus Windhager. And I want to point this out specifically because I think, or everyone thinks, that Josh Dunkley is going to go to Nick Dacos. And if it's not Josh Dunkley, it's going to be a Jared Berry type. So they're going to be able to manipulate that tag. And we often hear Collingwood say they love to manipulate the tag. So this is one of the hardest tags that Nick Dacos faced this season. And the way that Collingwood are able to manipulate the tag around stoppage was absolutely beautiful to watch. So we'll see this ball go up, and as soon as this ball starts to go up, Nick Dacos has started here, and he's running around to this side of the contest, and Marcus Windhager, as the tagger, is following him. But what that does is it allows a massive lane for Bo McCreary to just run straight through. So this is what we call manipulating the tag. This is why Collingwood at stoppage can score so often, because they get these sort of stoppage clearances where they are running and gunning out the front of stoppage with genuine pace, with genuine ability to make good decisions going inside forward 50. And realistically, Tim Membry should mark this football and they would get an easy shot on goal 15 metres out, pretty much directly in front. It happens so often when they win clearances, they score, because their clearance setups are so beautiful, so wonderful to look at. So Scott Pendlebury here, this clearance is made for Nick Dacos against Paddy Cripps. And what is Paddy Cripps' biggest weakness versus Nick Dacos? Speed and agility. So these first 3 steps, Nick Dacos not getting caught in a wrestle with Paddy Cripps and instead going to run through this. But the only way that he can win this clearance and not get caught in a tackle, caught in the muddle, caught in the confusion of the contest is if Scott Pendlebury does a really good job of making Sam Walsh essentially useless around this contest. So his ability to just wrap him up, get involved in a scraggle, get involved in a wrestle, push him into the contest, which creates this massive hole, this massive lane for Nick Dacos to use his agility and use his speed around this stoppage to get to this point. And then as soon as they can do that, I'm going to keep saying it, getting out the front of stoppage. So now Pendles, who was the one who created the stoppage, is now the one that gets out the front. Still Sidebottom, who was at the side of this stoppage, is now the one that's able to get out in front all of these Carlton players, and that's when they get really good, solid inside 50s. Collingwood getting out the front of stoppage is a massive strength, but also what them winning clearance and winning stoppage does is so much more important to them than it is to a lot of other teams. So because they are so reliant, their defensive system, their defensive structure is so good, is so sound, the way that they can get that involved really, really quickly is if they can win territory, if they can win set of bounce, if they can win stoppage. Because as soon as they win that set of bounce, that is what allows their defensive structure and their defensive system to set up straight away. They are so dependent on this. One, for their scoring, because they can score so well. And secondly, because of things like this. So we're going to see really smart Geordie De Goey stay out the front of this contest because he knows Nick Dacos is winning this, and as soon as he wins this clearance, bang, Geordie De Goey out the front of this stoppage. Now, in other times, as we saw in the other clips, they're able to score from this. Instead, he turns the football over, but straight away, this 12 to 15 seconds of Bruce Reville taking this mark from Geordie de Goey winning the clearance is the setup, is what is allowing Collingwood to set up their defence behind the football. So as soon as they switch this football, look at the ability for Collingwood to now cover all of the exits here and create this. So now Jack Crisp is going to be the +1. Lockie Schultz going to this side of the ground. Jack Crisp is going to be able to cover Kalarchi back here, which is going to allow Dan Houston to come up and impact this contest right now. So this is what I mean about Collingwood being able to set up their defensive structure, because as soon as they can set up their defensive structure, that is when they can start winning these forward half contests, and that is when the forward half game for Collingwood, which is probably their most important game, which is probably the game that excites a lot of the Collingwood fans the most, the forward half pressure, the forward half turnovers, that only happens when their defensive structure and their defensive system is able to set up. And the best way they can do that is by winning clearance. So they can score from clearance. They're probably the best team at scoring from clearance for the percentage that they actually win clearance. But when they win clearance, that is when they're able to completely dominate teams. And those strengths bring us to the Brisbane matchup that they're going to have. So this is 2023 Grand Final replay. We're really lucky that they've played twice this year, once in round 6 and once in round 21. And we're going to have a really quick look at both of those and how Collingwood played really well in both. Now, they did get beat in round 21, but they had some really key moments that if they can mix and match both of the styles of football that they played against them, they're going to be a real challenge for Brisbane come Saturday afternoon. So let's have a look at round 6, the round 6 matchup. And the biggest part of this game was Collingwood's transition game. So their ability to win contest and then just absolutely burst through Brisbane was pretty much the defining factor of the game. So no Dan McStay, but Mason Cox comes into the team, and he's going to have a massive game, a massive day, trying to stop the influence of a player like Harris Andrews. And if he can do things like this, where Dan McStay is able to take the mark, this is what kickstarts the Collingwood transition game, the Collingwood handball game. And if Collingwood can get this game going, where they're getting their players running inside 50 with ball in hand, if they can get players like Geordie de Goey, like Nick Dacos, like Josh Dacos, like Dan Houston would be a really good one to get in some form before a potential grand final. If they can get that sort of transition game going, they're going to challenge Brisbane. So we'll see it again here. Their burst off the half back line through players like Nick Dacos is what really broke the Brisbane lines in this round 6 clash. So if they can get this sort of speed, this sort of game, which is why I was so adamant about the importance of getting Geordie de Goey right for this, and if they can get that powerful Geordie de Goey back to add to the power of Nick Dacos, who's able to break through those lines, and this is what creates this line of pressure, this wall of Collingwood players leaking out the front of stoppage, leaking out the front of contest. If they can get the powerful Geordie de Goey back, if they can get a really powerful Nick Dacos, if they can get these line breakers, they are going to have so many opportunities to score against this Lions team, like we saw Geelong do. And for Collingwood, it's all about that defensive to offensive transition. So can you stop the transition of the Brisbane Lions, and can you turn that straight away into offensive transition for yourself? So Brisbane take a mark on their centre-half back line. This is what Brisbane love to do. They love to give this sideways handball to break through this initial pressure. So this is exactly what they do. Hugh McCluggage goes straight out to Will Ashcroft. But again, the defensive transition from Collingwood was really good in this round 6 clash, and it forced all of this pressure onto the person with the football. And as soon as they could do that, that is when they were able to get turnovers. And off the turnovers is what's going to be really important. Can Collingwood do what Geelong did? Can they do this sort of stuff where they create these line breakers off their half-back line in players like Jeremy Howe, in players like Dan Houston? I think Dan Houston is going to be such an important factor. If they can get him going, if they can get him back to his line-breaking best, that is when they're able. That is when they're going to be able to do things like this, because that is when they get this overlap run game going. That is when they get their offensive transition game going. But it is a massive if, because we haven't seen Dan Houston play his best. Jeremy Howe in that clip, who was so important in both of these matchups, is he going to be 100%? Is he even going to play? We just don't know if Collingwood is going to have that burst off the half back line. They didn't necessarily need the burst off the half back line against the Adelaide Crows. So are they going to, but they are going to need that burst coming off half back line to kickstart their offensive transition against the Lions. So this game is going to come down to two things. One is the thing that I just showed you, is the transition battle. Which team is going to be able to transition the football from their defensive half to their forward half really, really efficiently. So we saw in the round 6 matchup that Collingwood were able to shut down the Brisbane Lions transition and transition off the back of their turnovers and their intercepts. In the round 21 clash, it was switched. Collingwood couldn't really move the football pretty much at all, and Brisbane were able to move the football off their half back line through players like Dane Zorko really, really efficiently. And then realistically, the only benefit or the only good thing that came out of the round 21 clash was Collingwood's stoppage game, and that's what we spoke about before. So if Collingwood can get their stoppage game ready and raring to go, and they can get the transition game like they did in round 6 against the Lions, like they did against the Adelaide Crows in that qualifying final, if they can merge those two things together into one game, they're going to be really hard to stop. And when we talk about the stoppage game, this is probably going to be the next most important thing. And again, I'm putting a lot of pressure on players like Dan Houston in the transition game and Geordie DeGoey in the stoppage game, but these are the small margins that end up winning finals. So if Nick Dacos can play a role like this, where he's able to play as a genuine outside midfielder, as a genuine running option on the outside, and Geordie DeGoey is going to be huge for that. If they can get Geordie DeGoey to be the inside ball, the powerful midfielder that we know he can be, that allows so much for the outside players like Jack Crisp, like Scott Pendlebury, and like Nick Dacos on the outside, which means he can do things like this. If he can stay on the outside of contest and create this amount of separation from the Brisbane line midfielders, that is when he's going to be able to use his foot skills. That is when Collingwood's going to be able to go inside forward 50 like this. So again, all we're talking about here is the ability for Collingwood to get out the front of stoppages, to use that power, to use that speed on the outside. So as soon as his ball hits the ground, DeGoey is already on the backside of Dunkley here saying, if we get hands on the football here first, I'm gone and I'm off to the races. And as soon as Pendles gets his football, bang, he's off and running. He's absolutely off and running. Ned Long is off and running. So realistically, could have gone to both. They're both in space here. And that is what allows the Collingwood forwards and the Collingwood midfielders to be so deadly going inside forward 50, is when they can get speed on the football from stoppages, from clearances. So between round 6 and round 21, the two games that Collingwood and Brisbane did play against each other, there were two really key factors that we just went through. So the first game in round 6 was the transition dominance for Collingwood. They were able to shut down the Brisbane Lions transition, and they were able to score from their own transition. Now in round 21, it flipped. Brisbane was able to score from their transition, and they were able to shut down Collingwood's transition. But what they couldn't do was shut down Collingwood's stoppage and clearance game and their ability to score from stoppages. So if Collingwood can put both of those two things together, they become really, really, really hard to beat, and they open up a lot of ways for themselves to score, and they cut off a lot of ways for Brisbane to score. And we know that Brisbane has one weakness is the wrong word to use, but Brisbane are susceptible to getting themselves in trouble with the pressure game because they want to play such a high transition game, high flowing game off their half back line with players like Dane Zorko. They take a lot of risks, they take the game on, and they are really susceptible to pressure and turnover in their defensive half. And we saw what Geelong were able to do in their, I would almost call it like a Venus flytrap. So Dane Zorko takes his kick to the outside, and all the Geelong players here are doing is saying, we're going to play a spare behind the football so you can't go long, but we will allow you to play with the football sort of in your defensive 50 if that is what is going to allow you to kickstart your handball chain. If that gets the ball into general play, we will allow you to do that in your defensive half. And that's exactly what happens here. So Brad Close says, I'm not going to be able to run to this football. Shannon Neal, get ready because he's going to give this handball. But as soon as he gives that handball, Geelong are actually relatively okay with him giving the handball because they know they've got cover on the backside of, in their defensive half. They know they've got cover. So all they need to do now is, as soon as his ball is now in live free play because of the handball, they just collapse. Venus flytrap, collapse on the football. And that is what makes Brisbane is susceptible to. That is what made Geelong so good against them. They were able to just completely close down all of the options. So we look at this picture right here. Dane Zorko's got the football, but Shannon Neal, Max Holmes, Dangerfield, Stengel, they're all within that 10-metre radius of him. So he can't get a handball, but also it makes his disposal, his kicking really hard to do. So they almost lull you and almost almost entice Brisbane to play this high speed, high transition, high pressure game. And as soon as Geelong were able to do that and force Brisbane or entice Brisbane to play that game, they got so many forward half turnovers through their pressure, and they got so many scores from their forward half turnovers. It was kind of ridiculous. And if there's one thing we know about Collingwood, it is the fact that their forward line will pressure and their forward line will collapse, and their defenders and all of their players will collapse as soon as that ball hits the ground. It makes them really susceptible if you get through that initial wave of pressure. But if you don't, like Adelaide weren't able to do pretty much at all of the Collingwood players will come up, all of the Collingwood players will collapse on the football, and all of the Collingwood players will surround every single possession and make every single possession like Jamie Elliott was able to do, like Dan Houston was able to do, like Lipinski is able to do. They will make every single possession that you get inside their forward half so damn hard to use, so damn hard to be clean, so damn hard to be poised, and they will create forward half turnovers. So if Collingwood can do what Geelong were able to do and lull Brisbane into this false sense of security, this false sense of game, and they can bring their collapsing pressure and not get beaten on the outside and not get beaten over the top, they will be able to score a lot, and they will have a lot of open opportunities to score in their forward half. So the keys to Collingwood winning this game: 1, shut down the transition game of Brisbane that we saw Geelong be able to do, that we saw Collingwood be able to do in the round 6 clash. The second part, win the stoppage battle. Create stoppages and win stoppages, because we know when Collingwood wins stoppage, they score from stoppage so often. And with Geordie De Goey back and fit and firing, that opens so many more opportunities for players like Nick Dacos to win clearances and win stoppages and get out the front of stoppages. So many more opportunities for players like Pendles and Josh Dacos when he goes in there, and Dan Houston on the outside and Steele Sidebottom to get those feedback handballs from contest and from clearance. If they can win the stoppage battle, they will score heavily. And then the last part that Collingwood need to do is they need to create forward half turnovers, like we saw Geelong do, and like Brisbane opened themselves up to pretty much every time they get the football. They open themselves up to turning the football over in their defensive half, because they play such a high risk, high reward style of football. We will see Dane Zorko bite off some kicks, bite off some options that a lot of players, pretty much no other player in the league in their defensive half, will try to bite off. Now on Brisbane's side, that is what opens up a lot of their game. But on Collingwood's side, that opens up a lot of opportunity for you to turn the football over and score from it. So if you're Collingwood, you've got 3 things to focus on: stopping transition, winning clearance, and creating turnovers in your forward half. If you can do that, you will win this game. If you can't, Brisbane will win this game and go on to play in their 3rd straight grand final. So if you like these sort of videos, please feel free to stick around and subscribe. Tomorrow we will be breaking down the Brisbane Lions side of things. If you missed yesterday's video, it was all about the Hawthorn side of things in their Friday night clash, and the day before that was all about Geelong. Again, so on Saturday morning I will post a video breaking down the Geelong versus Hawthorn game, or why I think they won, or why I think who won, or blah, 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 blah. And on Sunday, it will be the same for the Collingwood-Brisbane game. And then a massive week going into grand final. We've got so much stuff to cover with grand final matchups, grand final predictions, grand final previews, breakdowns, all the sort of stuff like that, and some special guests coming on, maybe standing right here to help me out. So if you like these sort of videos, like I said, please feel free to subscribe. But that's it for me today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.